session on Women in Action, Maximizing Female Readiness, moderated by Kelsee Moore.
Can you hear me? Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Kelsee Moore. I work as a strength and conditioning coach for Air Force Special Warfare at Fort Bragg. I like to say that I wear 3 hats. I obviously work as a government contractor, as a strength and conditioning coach, but I'm also an officer in the U.S. Army Reserves, along with active duty spouse, so I'm also a dependent. I've been able to kind of take those 3 perspectives and refine who I am and how I like to work with female tactical athletes, and I'm honored to be here today with 3 very special guests with a plethora of background and experience, so I hope to ask some good questions today. But we're going to take the first couple of minutes and have each of our guests give a bio of their experience and their current projects that they're working on.
All right. Hi, I'm Nichole Morris. I'm a research professor at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Mechanical Engineering. I'm the director of the Human Factors Safety Lab. We do human factors work, which not everyone is familiar with, but it's maybe most simply described as the marriage between engineering and psychology. So we really take what we know about the needs, capabilities, and wants of humans and applying that to design, so more specifically into safety design. So I work in researching combat performance of combat medics and combat lifesavers, and we've been studying the differences of how female and male combat casualties receive treatment and care. So that's some of the work that I'm going to be talking about today. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I am Chief Warrant Officer 5, Fatima Nettles. I am an active duty Army warrant officer, and I am on leave, and my views are not that of DOD or the Army. Disclaimer, right? Just let everybody know that. I am a warrant officer, and if you don't know what an Army warrant officer, we're very specialized, we're very specific in one career field. So we're like the continuity of the Army. As the Army evolves and modernizes, we kind of modernize in that specific system. I am currently a command chief warrant officer, so I don't really work with systems. I'm really at the mentorship, and I mentor a lot of female warrant officers right now and really trying to make sure that we're being taken care of the way we're supposed to and that we're getting what we need to make sure that we're able to reach the rank of W5, because we have a limited amount of female command chief warrant officers and chief warrant officer 5s. That is the highest level of warrant officer that you can achieve, and that's the highest level in the Army. So that's what I do mostly on the side, as well as a command chief warrant officer in my agency. So that's what my basic, I guess my purpose is right now, and I just want to talk to you about what I've done so far.
Hey everyone, I'm Michael Bann. I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and I work for a company called Proof 3. We pretty much specialize in one-on-one relationships with clients, and so I happen to work a lot with tactical athletes, and I have for 12 years now, 12, 13 years. So really what I do is I build relationships with my clients, and I help them prepare for whether it's selection or if they're already at their unit. I maintain a relationship with them even when they're deployed, so I can help them with their fitness and nutrition and basically anything that's going to revolve around their performance and health. And the systems I use are kind of what I hope to talk about today, because I think that's what kind of holds back a lot of, I guess you can say, trainers that are in the military. Is just the systems sometimes seem to prevent good communication when people are downrange. And so that's kind of my current project, is working on better systems.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to open up the panel with a quote that I like to use as a coach, and it's kind of in reference to a gym setting, but I feel like you could each individually give your perspective on it, and I'd love to hear a response from any or all of you. A quote I like to use is, "Girls and women come to the gym to bond as a means to success, guys to battle to achieve the same thing. Women enter our workplace predisposed to connect to achieve, but men typically compete to achieve. trying to win and achieve the same goals, and both really want the results, but they have remarkably different ideas on how to get there. So in light of this symposium, working with female tactical athletes, how does that relate to you in each of your individual fields on needing to, I know it's a broad stroke, I recognize that, I understand the caveat, but if we know that and how men and women are, naturally wired, how can you implement that in your current field?
So I think I can speak on that. And that, you know what, that kind of resonates. I'm going to take that quote from you and I'm going to use that, right? And it's funny that you say that because I try to tell women that oftentimes we're told that women can't work with each other. We're told that a lot. And I don't know why, because I think women work well together. And when we realize that we should use each other's attributes to build the team, instead of trying to capitalize on people's weaknesses to make ourselves look better, I think we can be better as women. So that's one of the biggest hurdles that I try to get past is that don't allow people to tell you that women can't work together. Come to know that you find that attribute in the women that you work with and you allow that to help you build the team of women because we all come with the same struggle in the military. We come working harder, faster, longer. We make the biggest sacrifices in some of our units. We're all coming with that same challenge. If we work together to help each other and to build together, we will become a better team. So I think that quote can help us come with the right idea. Instead of saying that women can't work together, women are groomed to work together, to build together. And I think we'll have better results. So I like that quote.
Awesome.
Can you say the first few sentences of that quote again,
Of
please?
course,
That was
yes.
a long quote.
Yes, I know, I'm sorry. I'll read it again. Girls and women come to the gym, so in a gym setting, obviously, to bond as a means to success, where guys to battle to achieve the same thing. So women bonding, connecting, men battling, competing, but they're trying to achieve the same thing. They just go about it differently. Women enter a workplace predisposed to connect, to achieve. Men compete to achieve the same goals. Both want to win, both want the same results, but they have remarkably different ideas on how to get there.
I think the first thing that comes to my mind with that, actually, some of my female operators, I've worked with women that are actually in a tier 1 organization. And that was a very unique experience for me because you can pick a dude out that's like 6'1", like, I know what you're doing here. Like, you don't belong here. And it's you can kind of, like, you can see who they are and you can kind of guess, like, oh, that guy's military, And women, the way that, and I'm making a very generalized statement, but the way that women think, move, operate, even look, I think that really adds a huge strength to a unit because that allows them to kind of be more, I don't want to say fluid because that might not be the right word, but they can blend in better. And I think that also adds a different thought process, which I think can polarize a typically hyper-masculine organization to think in a different light. And I think in today's modern world, especially with how we're kind of like no longer GWAT, we're looking at near-peer conflict, I think that's really important. I think the problem is that we're not allowing that to really show. I think we're not really giving opportunities enough. That's how I look at it, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that definitely comes up even in my field as well. I think when we say like women in combat, we're thinking like, the Revolutionary War when we're all like lining up, against each other. But the reality is in our modern, our modern warfare, what we're experiencing is women maybe need to blend in. It's a much more unconventional way of having to fight the enemy. So I think you bring up a really good point of having to blend in. That's unique. Do you have anything, Dr. Morris, that you'd like to add to that?
So it's not really in line with the research that I'm doing, and so I was sort of sitting here trying to connect with that statement, and I think where it's hard for me to connect with it is I work in mechanical engineering, which is of all the STEM fields the least diverse of all of the STEM fields, and so just sort of reflecting on how maybe it's very difficult for women to achieve their goals when we are looking to connect, but we have very few female peers, and how few female mentors or bosses I have had in my career And so I think sort of just more broadly, it was something that sort of hit home of an absence. So if that's really some of the ways that we look to achieve our goals through that connection, what an isolating experience and how limiting our performance can be when we are sort of deprived of those partnerships and those relationships.
Absolutely. I'm going to kick it off with you. We can kind of hone in on what you do. I have one of your studies here, so I do apologize if I butcher some of the way that I presented. I'd love for you to correct me because it's just not my area of expertise. But your study that came out in 2023, the title is Limited Training in Undergarment and Clothing Removal Techniques to Expose Wounds in Combat Care. And I noticed something that kind of stood out to me as I was scanning was that out of the 21 combat lifesaver trained soldiers in this study, 7 participants, which is a third of the participants, reported experience in treating female simulated patients. So only a third of them had experience using a female dummy, would you say, or a simulator, rather than a male, and that would be pretty important in regards to chest seals or having to navigate female anatomy. And then it also states that 23.8% reported at least some experience applying a chest seal to a female, human, or simulated patient, and only 9.5% reported experience removing the female patient's t-shirt and similarly a female patient's bra. Findings suggest a pronounced gap in the CLS training curriculum. So that spurs on my question to you. What are some of the gaps that you're seeing in the academic world in how we are training our soldiers in regards to the female tactical athlete?
So the work that I got brought into through some conversations with Army Futures Command, where they were saying we're seeing in the data that women are less likely to survive or more likely to have adverse outcomes from injuries, the same injuries as their male counterparts. And so really what is driving the poor outcomes for female combat casualties? And particularly they were seeing this around injuries to the chest. And so we sort of dove right in, and from a human factors standpoint, we really think about processes and the entire process of how are you trained and what is the fidelity of the training simulator, what's the validity of the simulation. So if you have access to a female simulator, which we found very few have, if you did have access to that, was there a bra put on that female simulator? And were you afforded the opportunity to cut off the bra to apply the chest seal to the combat casualty? And what we found very quickly was a real absence of that training experience and exposure. And so when it comes time to actually perform the skills that many of these soldiers were trained under TC3, that the Tactical Combat Casualty Care, they were trained with often male dummies that are fully undressed. And so it's very easy to apply a chest seal to a gunshot wound to the chest when that mannequin is already undressed. But that doesn't resemble what it's going to be like in combat, where you really have to disrobe the casualty, make them as what's called trauma naked. It's very important to find those wounds. Gunshot wounds often don't look like gunshot wounds. They can kind of reseal. It's very hot and the skin can kind of sear itself closed. So what we're finding again and again in our simulations is that the combat medics and combat lifesavers lack the experience to undress a female combat casualty. There's a lot of hesitation and nervousness to do so, and ultimately the result is a failure to find a gunshot wound to the chest or improper treatment of that gunshot wound to the chest. And so it's a real problem. It's really concerning, the survivability of female combat casualties because of all of these issues.
Yeah, that's really unique. You could go down a lot of different rabbit holes with that. The first thing that comes to mind then is if we progress in that way to get more of that hands-on training, have female simulators, or they work with more females in their ranks, more specifically, in light of today's concern with consent and keeping dignity within the patient. How do you see that in your field? How do we train soldiers while also keeping consent and dignity in mind for the casualty?
Right. So it's certainly introduces a lot of awkward and uncomfortable situations when we're doing peer training and testing and our ability to do some of these procedures on our peers. There are a lot of resources available. There are some new full-bodied combat casualty simulators that are female that are coming out. So hopefully that will be the substitute, so we won't be asking our peers to expose themselves to one another. You can also use something called standardized patients. So these are patient actors. They're people that are trained to take on the persona of a patient, and we've used some of those in our study. But I think what's really critical is that we take a hard look at our training environments and make sure that we are taking the time to actually dress the mannequins. If it's a female mannequin, put a bra on the female mannequin and allow the trainee the practice to actually cut off the clothing. And this isn't just for female combat casualties. We find that the male combat casualties are also at risk because many of the soldiers that come through our studies report that they've never had the opportunity to actually cut off clothing. And I get it, it takes time and it takes cost to dress these mannequins and uniforms and cut them off. But our most valuable asset is not the clothing and it's not the bra, it's the soldier. And so we have to spend this money and time to actually dress these mannequins and give people the actual experience because we don't want the first time that a combat medic or combat lifesaver cuts off a uniform to be in battle. Like, we don't want them to be practicing on the job in that way.
Absolutely. You know, what comes to mind too is, I mean, even as a reserve officer, and thinking about funding, you know, I'm a medical services officer, so I even think about the medics that I had, you know, in my ranks and what resources we had, and I see that gap. So what other things are you finding in your projects that you feel like could be ways we could move forward to better the training for our service members?
Yeah, so, you know, we hear this term about training scars or simulation scars, that their performance gets modified because of the way that they were trained. So again, I think this is really comes back to we've got to practice the way that we actually want to perform. So a small example of this is the IOTV, the vest. And so there's a quick release on that. There's sort of a new design, but there used to be a ripcord that you could pull that off. And we needed a couple of those for our study, and I had to sort of like through back channels buy them off of like the black market myself for the research, and they came in really dirty. And as a side note, my husband was in the Guard for 10 years, the first part of our marriage, and so when I brought it home, I needed to wash it up, and he goes, "Oh, don't pull that ripcord," and I was like, "Why?" And he goes, "You can't get it back together," and I'm like, yeah, you can. We've already done it. It's like a fun game in my research team. Like, who can get it back together the fastest? Marshall, who's not here, he loves it. Like, it's so fun. You just have to know how to do it. And he was like, oh, well, we were always told never pull that ripcord because you can't get it back together. Well, what we find in our simulation study is we dress the mannequins in that vest and no one pulls the ripcord. Everybody futzes around with the Velcro. It takes much longer, and they cannot get that vest off. That's an example of that training scar of you're not practicing actually using the equipment, the materials, the resources that you have to save yourself a little time, or creating myths that it can't be put back together when it absolutely can get back together. So some of that I think is really important. But more broadly, you know, when we talk to soldiers, afterwards about kind of what their experience was like, why did they not treat the chest wound, why did they put the chest seal right up over the bra, which of course is not going to create a seal. Almost every time, unprompted, SHARP will come up and they will say, it's beat into us from day one. You look at someone wrong, you touch someone wrong, you get kicked out, you go to jail. And so this is a really real and omnipresent issue that I think is bleeding in to the treatment of female combat casualties. And so how we go about this, how we address this, I'm not quite sure. But I think there needs to be a more open dialogue, a framing when we're talking about SHARP, which is such an important issue, to be still putting trust in this relationship, that male and female medics and combat lifesavers alike feel that trust between the person that they're treating, and then maybe some more openness and honesty about we as women, we don't mind our breasts being out if it means we're going to have our life saved, right? And so making that really clear, I think anyone who's given birth knows, like after that point you're like, whatever, just like I don't care who sees what. And so I think maybe men don't quite understand how often for women our bodies get put on display in our healthcare on a regular basis, and what a not big deal it is for us to have our breasts exposed. But there are deep cultural and organizational issues that are bleeding on top of this access and training, and so not one solution is going to solve this issue.
Yeah, I see that. It's kind of complicated. What I pulled out of that last 30 seconds of when you were talking is it comes down to the trust between service members. And I think we'll see very paralleling themes with other people when they talk. So I'll hop over to Fatima now. What are you seeing are some of the biggest challenges for some of our female service members as they grow through the ranks?
Some of the challenges, or one of the biggest challenges, is making the choice of being a leader, a mother and a wife. When do you make that choice? And it's hard. It's hard because, everybody wants to, make it to the highest rank. Every woman wants to, be that best mother and then want to be a successful wife. And when do you choose? And what is balance, right? So, and it's been a challenge for me. And, it's very hard as a female mentor to kind of give them guidance. But, throughout the years, I have learned that the best advice to give is to empower where you can empower, right? So in order to be able to make the best decision at the best time is when it comes to choosing when you have to be a leader, a mother, and a wife is, empower those subordinate leaders, right? Because, at the end of the day, the mission needs to be done, right? And if you have to be a mother when it's time to lead, as long as the mission gets done, it's okay. The turmoil is okay because you have allowed and you've empowered your subordinate leaders to make sure that the mission is going to get done. So you can leave your job to take care of your sick child, right? The mission is going to get done. So your higher leaders are not going to come after you saying, why didn't this get done? And you don't have to explain to them why you had to go take care of your sick child, because the mission got done because you empowered your subordinate leaders. And then your sick child is taken care of. Or if you're missing something that your husband had to do or your wife had to do because they had a milestone in their career, you've communicated to them. So communicate with your spouse. So that's what I've always told my female subordinates. Please empower your younger leaders. Make them as powerful as you. Make sure that you're teaching them as much as you know. That makes you a better leader. That makes sure you're not the single point of failure. That makes you able to be flexible and to take care of your family. Because at the end of the day, when you leave the military, you still have your family. And what you don't want to do is put so much time into this military, and then when you leave the military, you have nothing left. Your child doesn't want to talk to you. Your spouse is gone because you have left them behind throughout this whole career. You want to make sure that you have taken care of everything. Because when you leave the military is really not concerned with you anymore, right? Right? Empower your younger leaders, and they will love you for that. They will love you for that. And they will always look back to you, reach out to you and say, you made me a better leader because you trusted me, right? And you can always look to them and you can say to them, thank you for making this mission happen so I can take care of my child. And you've taught them to do the same thing as they move forward, right? So it has created a cycle of good leadership, good parenthood, good family. So that's definitely, one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest hurdles. And it took me time to get there. Don't think as soon as I became a leader, I was like shooting this out the door. It took me and my daughter to go through things. It took a divorce and a remarriage to get it right. But I mean, I think that was the biggest challenge and the biggest hurdle, and it took me to go through things to get there. Another challenge that I think that I had to realize, and I think I mentioned it before, is understanding that every person has a unique responsibility in an organization, in an agency, or wherever they work, right? No one person or no two people have the same qualities. Identify your quality and your attributes, right? And understand where your place is, and then understand where others have their place in there, and y'all work together, right? Never look at somebody as better than you, right? Or never look at, because you're not good at that thing that they are, and see that you're weaker than them. Never try to highlight somebody's weakness to make yourself look better. Self-awareness, things like that. When you're good and you're self-aware and you're secure about yourself and you're able to identify what your attribute is and what somebody else's attribute is, and you work as a team, you can evolve, you can grow, instead of having turmoil and friction and things like that. And I've just seen, that's another thing that I've learned going through and building those teams and building those relationships and growing through. And it just makes things so much better. Once you're secure with yourself, you have self-awareness and you grow. So those were the biggest challenges with me, and those are the things that I speak to the ones that I mentor about, and I talk to them younger. I learned at a very older age, my late 30s, but I try to talk to them as young soldiers, as young service members, so they can catch it younger. Because if I would have known earlier in my military career, in my life, I think I would be much better than I am today. So I try to catch them a little bit younger, but that's it.
Awesome. So I'm going to stay on you for just a couple more questions, if you don't mind, because I feel like this is really applicable. When we spoke earlier, you had mentioned something really concrete that you do with your subordinates. I believe it's create a 10-year plan.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I would love for you to talk about that.
Oh, yeah. So what I do is, with my subordinates, I have them create a 10-year plan, and it's basically milestones that they would like to complete within 10 years. And it's not just their milestones, right? It's their family milestones. So they put their spouses' milestones on there, their kids' milestones, and they share that with their bosses, right? And they share that with their bosses, so their bosses know, or their superiors know, what's important to them, right? What's important to them, what's important to them from their personal aspect, their professional aspect. So when their boss, when they have to go to the field, their boss understands that, hey, yes, sir, I'll go to the field, but understand this: my wife's birthday is this time. My child's birthday is this time. My child's first time on the baseball field or first time on the football field. And it may be their only first time, because my child doesn't play good baseball or football. Just want to let you know that. That's their first time. I just want to let you know. So I may need to get on FaceTime with my wife, or my spouse, to see this time. I will definitely support the mission, but I need this time because this is important to me. You lay that out. Lay that out for them, right? And let them know that this is important to you. And you don't just bring it up, arbitrarily. You put this out there that over these 10 years, these are my milestones and my family's milestones. And I also think you have your subordinates do that and give that to you, because you also need to know what is important for your subordinates, right? Before you put them on mission, before you have these things that you need them to do. And you make that a part, you put that on your calendar, because you get the best quality service member or soldier that you care about. What I have my subordinates do, they give me their 10-year plan, and I've put everything on a calendar, and they put some crazy stuff on there. One of them says, my wife is going to bake her first cake. He put that on there. The next day, I asked him, how did it turn out? He said she didn't make it, but she's going to make it tonight. So I added that on my calendar. But he was so glad that I asked him about that and that I cared. I have no issues with them. Sometimes that's all that they want to know, is that you care about them. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, you spend more time with your subordinates than you spend with your family at times. So you become their family. And I want my boss to know what matters to me, because when I'm feeling some kind of way, Or when I'm like saying, hey, sir, I'll do this for you, but I told you this was going to be important to me. And I told you my child doesn't play the clarinet very well. And they did make first chair. I'm feeling some kind of way. Or why I'm side-eyeing you. I want them to know just as much about me. And I want them to know that I care and I want you to care about what matters to me. I think that's important that we do that, right? We need to make our families important, and we need to make sure that our leaders and our subordinates know what's important. So, yes.
Awesome. I'm always about personal responsibility. So I think that's something that all of us here in the room can take a hold of instead of, constantly pointing fingers at, our leadership doesn't understand. I think that's something that we can always take a hold of the reins of and plan out. My last question for you, it's a bit of a devil's advocate question, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but you are very well spoken, so I'd love to hear your response to it. I do think that probably a lot of us in the room were probably at least millennials or above, but Gen Zers are some of the youngest service members joining the service today, and there's a lot in society today, especially with young females, that have these certain mantras of "you do you" or "cut what doesn't serve you." These really harsh, no forgiveness, no grace mantras. But to be honest, when you're in the military, we are a melting pot of people, and we are going to disagree with our opinions. And so how do you, as a leader with so much experience, go through that mentorship, maybe with a younger female service member that might espouse to those harsh, you do you, cut what doesn't serve you type of mantras that I'm not sure would be great teamwork tactics?
Right. I do agree that cutting people off is not a good tactic for teamwork at all, okay? And I will tell you from personal experience, I have said some things, I have done some things, I have behaved in some ways that people should really cut me off, but I am so grateful that they didn't, and I've needed them in my life. So the reason why I am an advocate of grace is because I have needed it, right? Because it's not indicative to who I am. I'm not a repeat offender, but I've had a bad day, right? I've been on my period. I have had a little bit of PMS. You know what I'm saying? I woke up so sometimes we do have to give grace. Now, you don't give grace to repeat offenders, people that just disrespect you and keep doing it over and over again. You don't give them grace. But you have to realize that sometimes people do have a bad day. Sometimes people are going through things, right? I think we should voice how we feel to people, and if they do it again, cut them off. But at the end of the day, think about how you have treated people. Think about some things you have said to people. Do you think you deserve to be cut off? But did they cut you off? Would it have hurt you if they cut you off? Do you need them in your life? Did you want grace? Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. Right? So I think that we need to be a little bit more considerate of the emotions and the traumas and the things that people have gone through before we completely delete them and cancel them out of our lives, right? We have to be considerate of the things that people have gone through and the things that we have gone through. Now, again, repeat offenders get no mercy. But really consider who we're cutting off, because I know my daughter, boy, I have said some things, but I love her. I love her, and I'm glad she hasn't cut me off, and I've had to apologize, But we are a team of people that come from all walks of life, right? All different cultures, different backgrounds, right? And we do have to take that into consideration, and we do have to give each other grace because we all are hopefully going to a common goal, right? And I think that grace is sufficient for those who deserve it. So think about that before we just cut people off over one or two incidents. All right, just think about that. And I know it's hard because this is the cancel culture, but just think about that. All right, because we are a team, we are an organization, we are agencies out here. One common goal, maybe a bad day, maybe a bad month, but at the end of the day, we are worth the grace because we all need it at some time.
Awesome. I think that points back to the secure aspect that you brought up earlier, Fatima, of just being as women in a workplace, when we are secure, we can shine in that teamwork with each other rather than feeling like we have to cut down the other women that we're working with. So I love that. Now, Michael, we'll bop on over to you. So you're a strength and conditioning coach. So honestly, I probably have a lot in common with you because we're both meatheads, which I love. But you have such a unique way that you work with your athletes, and it intrigues me, that's for sure. But based on what you kind of say is like your gift of pattern recognition and being able to build systems, how are you able to give such quality training to your female athletes that maybe a lot of coaches or embedded coaches like me, we can tend to miss the mark? So what have you discovered over time?
Well, one, I think before I answered that, I wanted to actually, when I was listening to you talk about pulling kit off, I remember when I was in the infantry in the Marine Corps, we were out at, it was either Mojave Viper or NTC, that was a long time ago. I had to be the dummy for the corpsman to try and find the gunshot wound. And I remember he ran up and started cutting my clothes off and ripped the cord of my kit. He thought I was shot. Like, he actually thought I was shot. So he was doing everything right. But I just remember thinking, I have to put this freaking thing back together. And I have to buy a new belt, new trousers. I have to buy a new blouse. This is bullshit. So I can imagine when you're going through the medical training, that's probably embedded deeply. And medics and corpsmen are probably like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. That's just training. So it made me laugh because I remember that emotion of just like, this is bullshit. I don't want to do this. And it was frustrating to put everything back together. So, and then the Gen Z comment that you just made. I actually was listening to a podcast, and I can't remember the name of the podcaster, but it was, he was a Buds cadre. And one of the candidates did something that was going to get him potentially dropped from Buds. And he was a Gen Zer. And this cadre was explaining the mentality that Gen Z had, because there has been a lot of criticisms. And I work a lot with some Gen Z, tactical athletes. And his comment was, he had this candidate stand in front of him at parade rest and was like, I can drop you from this course. And the candidate was just brutally honest. And he said, do you not fear me? Like, do you not know who I am? Like, I'm in charge of all this. And he was like, I don't fear you, but I respect you. So I think Gen Z has a healthy respect for authority that isn't toxic. And I just think, like, back to 15, 20 years ago, trying to tell somebody like, hey, I know we got to go to the field. We got NTC, Mojave Viper, but I have this going on with the family. I remember my command at the time would have been like, tough shit, we don't care. Like, message to Garcia, like, doesn't matter. We're going to be in the field for the next 3 months, then we're deploying, then we're going back, and blah, blah, blah. So it's actually kind of nice to hear that leaders aren't like that anymore. It's really refreshing, because I think that's a huge retention problem. And with social media, if retention is bad, recruitment's going to be bad, because word spreads. And then we're already back to the fitness thing. We're struggling because how much of America is obese, how much is overweight. Like, can you even enlist if you're 60 pounds overweight? And so the fitness thing, I think having less toxic leadership and more empathetic leadership, because I think empathy, we get it confused, and that's where I think my skill set comes into play as a coach. Empathy isn't tolerance, it's understanding. Like, unconditional love isn't something that is unconditionally tolerant. You can absolutely, like, appreciate somebody, but you can still hold them to a standard. And I think really how I look at it, or at least my pattern recognition with stuff, I try to understand, which has, most people don't view it as a fitness thing, but attachment styles, secure, avoidant, disorganized, anxious, that plays into how you, want to do fitness. And so just, I try to be as empathetic as I can. And again, it comes back down to the software and the systems that I use, which allow me to build a relationship with each human that I work with on a N=1 times 10,000 kind of basis. And then through those relationships, that's where I can get to know and understand the exact needs of that athlete. And so I think that's what would set me apart, because I don't think there's any coach out there that doesn't want to help their athletes. But when you have 300 athletes and you can't have a real well-developed relationship, you're almost to a point of templating, and you're like, well, this should work based on principle, but without knowing everything that's going through, what they're going on, like in their life or what's going through their head, you can't individualize stuff for that operator or that athlete very well.
I completely agree from my own personal experience. The limiting factor a lot of times with these embedded teams with strength coaches in H2F or in my project or in a POTIF project in SOCOM, right? The limiting factor typically is being able to individualize on a mass scale. Sounds like you've been able to conquer that to some extent.
Well, yes, I have. I've had 135 clients at any given point in time, 4 deployed back here. Each one has a very individualized program, and I only write 1 week at a time. So I don't write 6 weeks out. Like back in the day, it used to be Excel documents. You'd email it. Here's your Excel document. Here's your 6-week program. Best of luck. Very much like if you're familiar with Exos, very much like an Exos thing. I would write 1 week at a time. I would track their data individually. I would watch their videos. I would send them a video. Hey, you're squatting like this. Do this. Let me show you what you need to do. And then we would have monthly consults that are, anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes. And it was 1 week at a time. And tracking that, I mean, I've had some clients I think my average client lifespan is about 8 years is the average, where they work with me day in and day out for 8 years. Whereas if you're just working with somebody for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks because they're in a pipeline, I think that's the strength that I have is I've been able to track data, again, N=1 times 10,000, but for 8 years. And there's not a lot of research out there, to my knowledge, that even looks at a human being for 8 years consecutively. So I think it comes back down to a software problem or a systems problem. And that's where I think my strengths kind of come into play, and that's why I'm able to use, empathy and communication and building a real relationship, and then also being able to write programs around a woman's cycle. There's some days that my women are like, hell no, dude, I'm not doing that. And I'm like, yeah, we're just gonna go for a walk today. I totally get it. So knowing that, I track my women's hormones and I educate, because there's a lot of women that, that really understand it, and then there's a lot that don't. And so it's always a little weird being the man trying to teach a woman about her period. But it's a conversation that gets broached because I've built that trust. And it's like, hey, so this is about that time of the month again where you're going to start feeling not so good. Let's just deload it a little bit. Let's just give you some easier, lightweight stuff. And in 2 weeks, you're going to feel great. And then I'm going to send you some tough stuff so you're going to have a PR or whatever it is. And then the conversation around when you're at Ranger School, tough luck. You're going to have a period. You can't just be like, hey, sorry, Ranger instructor, I got to take a couple days off here. You can't do that. So having those conversations and building awareness is, I think, the educational aspect, I think, is really what drives the success.
Absolutely. And you having your systems in place frees you up to be a more empathetic coach, because if you were just bogged down with just trying to write, that oftentimes you, as a coach, you really lose that part of working with your athletes, because you're just so inundated with trying to write so many programs. And so you do end up creating just templates that are not as individual as what somebody would hope. Could you give any meat and potatoes of what those systems look like, or what you can advocate for? I mean, I know I work on an HP team, and I think there was a PT here. We have a researcher here. So what do those systems look like in being able to kind of mass produce that while keeping the ability to keep it individual?
So to my knowledge, most programs are written on I think Trainerize or Train Heroic. Yeah, Train Heroic. I use a program called CoachRx. It's not a team-based model. And I think when you take a team-based model, you're going to have to coach like you're coaching a team. And this isn't the NFL. Operators, I kind of joked about it, but I kind of got into an argument, to be honest, with a coach 4 or 5 years ago who was on HP staff for a Tier 1 group. And they were like, well, we treat them kind of like running backs. And I was like, CQB is not like the NFL Combine. When you go into a shoot house, that's not, yes, there's some change of direction, but it's not like you're a football player. And then the argument was, well, they have rifles, and so let's look at them like lacrosse players. And I was like, I'm a competitive shooter. I shoot a lot. I shoot at least 1,000 rounds a week. I've never ran with my rifle. You don't do that. That's what lacrosse players do. So no, we don't want to treat them like that. We need to treat them like tactical athletes. And I stood in front of a room full of a ton of operators, male and female, and every single one had their own desire for fitness. And I would ask every single one, what do you do to stay in shape for the job? How do you stay resilient? Some of them didn't even want to go to the gym. Like, I hate the gym. I just do the job because that keeps me in shape, and then I just shoot on the weekends. So when you have a team-based program, it's like, here's your 5-3-1 Wendler whatever style training, and we're going to apply it to a mass group. That system is what's holding you back. I use Coach RX, which is kind of, it's very similar to True Coach, if anyone's familiar with True Coach, or formerly known as Fitbot. It's, everything is about like the human, the one person that you're working with. And so it can be frustrating if you don't know how to write programs very fast, but if you can learn how to like hotkey, which is all just keyboard typing and taking typing classes. I took 2 years of typing classes to be a fast typer, but it helps. It takes me 3 minutes to write a program, whereas I talk to some coaches and it takes 20 to 30 minutes. And so when you have to write a 30-minute program, it takes 3 minutes. You have more time for other things. And so the software incorporates Loom, which, if you're familiar with Loom, it's basically a video recording software system. They have AI that'll transcribe it, and then you can send that to the clients, and it's all within one platform that's on a cell phone. The only downside is that if OPSEC is a problem, sometimes they can't post videos. So that's the one thing where, like, being remote, I have to rely on their description of how it felt if they're not allowed to have a phone in the gym there. But Coach RX integrates with Loom and then Zoom, and using scheduling software for Zoom to make sure they have access to my calendar at all times. If they need to talk to me, they can hop on right on their phone. So everything is kind of automated like that.
That's awesome. I recently ran into that problem. My husband's deployed, and I'm programming for him on Train Heroic, and I'm like, well, send me a video of your squat. He's like, Kelsee, I can't do that. And I'm like, ah. So I found that to be, really applicable. Like, there are some real barriers, when we're embedding these strength coaches or embedding teams that are operating in a civilian capacity, or just totally third party, how we can work with them and just maintain their security. Do you have a comment on that?
I usually tell them try to sneak a video.
Oh, okay. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. I'm like, hey, if it's really bothering you, sneak a video. Or I just say, hey, if it hurts, don't do it, and let's just find an alternative.
Yeah. I always call it's just coaching. It's tools. It's tools in your tool belt. So since we're at a female symposium, what are some of the biggest gaps that you see as a coach with these systems? N is 1 times 10,000. What have you seen are some of the biggest gaps coaches are missing with our female tactical athletes? Maybe more specifically, our elite female tactical athletes. The only reason why I caveat that with elite is because, to be honest, I think most women probably in conventional forces could use some classic GPP, general physical preparedness, probably to start with. But then once we move to that next level, what are some of those gaps that we're seeing?
One, I think a gap would be understanding how hormones work. Male and female coaches from an industry level don't understand female hormone cycles and the psychology of stress that alters hormone cycles. And so I think understanding that allows a coach to track a hormone cycle, and then you can actually periodize intensity levels, volume levels around, menses, whether it's day 14, day 21, day 25, because even on an individualized level, some women feel great when they ovulate, and others are like, nah, I really don't want to train hard. And so knowing and asking those questions is probably what I think is limiting in terms of the coaching aspect. I think the biggest aspect has nothing to do with fitness. I think it actually has to do with predisposed perceptions. I guess that'd be a way to word it. Just assuming, well, I can't run 5 miles in 30 minutes, so you're not going to be able to do it. That's really common. And I recently had a female airman. She's a captain, and she decided, and she fought like hell to get approval from her command, but she went to air assault as an Air Force officer, and she rides a desk. She's a beast. She crushed it. There's only 2 dudes that beat her. She beat all of the other men, even on the rucks. And she had the exact same kit, loadout, everything. She decided she wanted to switch over and go CA, and this was just a month ago. So she flew to Fort Campbell to do the ACFT. She beat every man at the ACFT, including deadlifting. And she can run a 32-minute 5 mile. I mean, she keeps up and shames a lot of the dudes that go out. So she's doing CA selection next. And I think the biggest limiting factor isn't the fitness side. It's understanding that if she wasn't given the opportunity, she would never have even been able to prove herself. And so I've noticed that. I've been humbled a lot. And I think a huge part of my humbling is I do a lot of jujitsu. I've been choked out by some women that I'm like, there's no chance. And they just embarrass the heck out of me. So I've learned to be like, okay, like there are some really, really, I call them sleeper builds. Like they're super fit and we're not giving them a chance. So I think as coaches at least, like thinking like, oh yeah, well you can't do this because I can't do that. There's no chance you can. Getting rid of that mentality and just giving women opportunities. I think that's really the biggest limiting factor. Because I think most coaches have good in their hearts. I don't think they're trying to be malicious and, sabotage. I just think that we're so biased. And the research, there's not a lot of research on women. I think CrossFit has really helped with that, to be honest with you. I think seeing women compete in CrossFit and now High Rocks, I think we're starting to realize like people can do some incredible things if we just shut our mouths and let them do it.
Yeah, even on our phone call together, you and I talked about as a coach, kind of comes down to belief. Like if you show your belief in that athlete, they're going to run with it. It puts steel in their spine. And so I kind of hear you repeating that in a sense. It's like put your biases aside, opinions aside. If you show that belief and you build that confidence in them, they're the ones with the skill set, and just let them run.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I want to show them that belief, but I want to create autonomy in their own belief structure. So I want to help them like rewire their subconscious if that's an actual issue, because self-affirmations aren't really that effective. The subconscious doesn't really understand language. It understands like repetition, emotion, and imagery. And so again, it comes back down to the relationship, the systems in place to actually have that kind of relationship and conversation to help them come up with tools and strategies that actually make them more autonomous and then shift their belief structure. But I still get word from a lot of my females that there's toxic misogyny. One of my officers, she was doing the workout that I gave her, and her major, so he came up in the middle of the gym and just threw extra stuff at her and said, nope, you got to prove yourself, do this too. And it's like, do you not have any concept of what periodization is? Individualization, like this is exactly what she needs. That's the right dose. And this random major comes up and just makes it harder for no reason. And now someone's getting hurt. And so I think it comes back down to having good systems in place to individualize things and also getting rid of that toxic mentality and holding people accountable for having those mentalities.
Yeah, it kind of wraps it back around to, I feel like, my very first quote that I said, that men compete typically. And in that moment, in an insecure fashion, he was like, let me see you compete. Let me see where you are. Let me rack and stack you. So I see that, it wraps back around to what Fatima said, being secure in who we are, in that connection with individuals to have good teamwork, and so that we can and just have more effective teams, put the mission first. I believe we have about 5-6 minutes. Is that right?
We can do 10.
10 minutes? Mm-hmm. Okay, 10 minutes, and then we head into lunch. Would love to have some questions for our guests. If you have a question, excellent.
Hi, my name is Selda Buchisturk. I'm a research scientist at MIT Lincoln Laboratory in the Bioanalytic Systems and Technologies group. I had a question about female hormone tracking as it relates to performance and training and adjusting that training. And it seems to be a common theme throughout the last day and today as well. I'm wondering at what frequency you need to be tracking these hormones and like at what rates with respect to how frequently you're tracking, are you adjusting the training? And then what kinds of hormones specifically are kind of the big ones that are the most prevalent to the work that you do?
So I like to track the cycle, not necessarily the hormones, because that can be very burdensome on someone that has to go and track things on a regular basis. But I'll have my women use natural cycles. It's an app. And you can take your temperature every single day, and it's really, really accurate. With my women that are trying to get pregnant, they've used it for fertility. It will tell you, like, hey, you can get pregnant. Hey, you cannot get pregnant. So we use that. And so that way I can track and say, okay, every single month you have a 29-day cycle. It's been 37 days since you've had a period. Something is going on. And so I use that kind of like a blood pressure test. You know, if your blood pressure is 120/80, I can kind of assume things are okay. But if it's 150/90, I should ask a question like, hey, what's going on? It may not be anything serious, but it could be, and so we need to ask that question. From there, I would rather use blood, but I've used urine. I've used a test called the Dutch test. It just kind of depends on what's the easiest for my females to be able to get a hold of and do. Blood can be really tough in certain situations, like just command pushback, for example. Like, you don't need to test that. You don't need to do that. This is useless. I've had PAs say there's no point in testing that. And it's like, you're a PA. You should understand how hormones work. But urine, it's really easy. You just pee on a strip multiple times in a day, and I can look at your progesterone, your estrogen. Ideally, I want to look at your progesterone later in the cycle, because if we're looking at progesterone earlier in the cycle, we're not going to see much. But that's typically how I'll approach it, is natural cycles. Then I can use a Dutch test and or blood to go with that. And the nice thing about the Dutch test is it does also tell me a little bit about your stress levels, because I can see your cortisol, and I can see it throughout the whole day versus a snapshot in time. So and then we use that to kind of correlate it with, like, hey, what's life been like? So that's how I personally do it. But in terms of writing the program, that's individualized. Some women feel really good, like when they're ovulating, it's like, wow, you're glowing. Go do a 1 rep max back squat. Go do a 2-mile run time trial. But at the end of the day, we have to be realistic. Like, an ACFT might come up when you're on your period, and you just might be having the worst day of your life because of it, and you still have to do the ACFT. So there has to be a little bit of realism there, but at least creating awareness around that works pretty well for my women.
Thank you.
I'm like going blind.
I can speak up. It's fine. Hi.
Hello.
Sorry. I'm Malin Taylor. I'm a flight med provider in the Air Force, and a lot of the talks that we've had for hormone tracking and stuff is great, I guess, if you're not on a contraceptive, but a lot of our females, and I would assume those that are being deployed, are on a contraceptive, and that makes hormone tracking really difficult. Do you change your training plan for those that are on contraceptives, specifically hormone-based contraceptives?
Sometimes. That's the one-word answer. What I'll typically do is I always want to understand why they're doing it, because sometimes it's, well, I just have a really terrible period, so the PA just put me on this so I stop having periods, versus I don't want to get pregnant. If it's because there's a really, really like symptomatic period, we'll have conversations around things you can do to alleviate that. There's nutrition, there's lifestyle interventions, there's a lot you can actually do to make your menstrual cycle more bearable, if you will. When you're downrange, it's one of those things that I'm only writing 1 week at a time. And so I actually throw litmus tests into a program where I know where someone should sit based on the data they put in. And I can look at that, and that's my blood pressure test. That's where I can say, hey, in the last 7 days, something has changed. What's going on? I have a woman right now that's across the pond, and I saw that in her data. And I said, hey, what's going on? She's like, well, we're only supposed to work from 12 to 12, but it's been more like 11 to 3 a.m. So 11 a.m. to 3 a.m. the next day, like long days. And I could see that in her numbers, and that's how I would begin to change stuff. And I was like, all right, well, you know what? We're just going to go ahead and do some dumbbell lunges, not heavy back squats. We're going to stop overstressing you. And then when it comes to being on, any type of birth control, just the real conversation of, hey, this could be a limiting factor for you. It might serve you now, but just understand that it could inhibit other things down the road. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, please forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn. And I asked this question, an informal poll is what I'm requesting, because we're kind of in this space, and I think we could do some work here. But again, please forgive my ignorance. So what I'm wondering is, to all the women here, can you, if you're willing, could you raise your hand if you believe that your training preferences or abilities vary, like as a function of your menstrual cycle? Okay. Okay. Now, how about the women who believe that it does not? Are there any here who believe it does not? Yeah? Okay, okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. Okay, I think we have some work to do, and I think we can do that work. Yeah, okay, thank you.
One thing I'll add to that, there are times, like back to your question, there are times I don't want my women to have a period. Like a perfect example would be like Ranger School. Like I would rather you be amenorrheic. I would much rather that be the case because I don't want you to have the highs and lows of that. Same for, other types of pipelines. If a woman's going to go to OTC after walking around for a couple months in West Virginia, like I think she probably would be better off to not have a cycle in that sense. We see it in sport too. We see it in CrossFit a lot. Like with my females that I work with in CrossFit, I don't want them to have a period. I want them, one, they're going to be so lean that they're going to lose their cycle anyway. And that's almost like a, hey, just so you know, this isn't good for you getting pregnant, but we're not trying to get pregnant right now, so just be aware of that. And that comes back down to communication, building the trust, and just having the relationship with the client.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that, actually? So if we see amenorrhea, right, that's typically a big red flag that, like, things are bad. We're in an energy deficit, we're overly stressed, and so to add those stressors on top of something that's already as stressful as Ranger School, like, how can you just, like, I guess, explain more of your thought process around that? Like, why would you induce more stress on top of an already, or, like, put an already stressed person in a really stressful environment?
Well, if that's the mission, I mean, if you're trying to train for Ranger School, and you have 3 weeks before you take off, I can't necessarily take it easy on you. But what I'll usually try to do is I'll try to find out what other stressors are going on. Because if you have to ruck, you have to ruck. I can't just say, hey, sorry, like, you're super stressed. We're just going to take the rucks out. And now when you go and do it for real, your feet are destroyed and your back is killing you. But I'll try to find out where other stressors are at. I'll also look at food logs, big time.
Right, but what I'm saying is that, like, why would you want to send somebody into Ranger School already in a deficit as opposed to as well prepared as they could be and well fed and low stress, like going into what we know to be really
I
a
must
big
have
challenge.
completely misexplained that. So my goal when I send somebody to a pipeline, I want them to be as healthy as humanly possible because they're going to get less healthy. And so if you're at 40% health, let's just use easy numbers, 40%, and I know you're going to drop 20%, now you're at 20%, now you're broken. I'd rather you be at, 100% and drop 20% and still be healthy. But sometimes not having a period can be beneficial. So having a woman on contraceptives to avoid having that cycle in environments where having a cycle could really make things not so fun. And then with CrossFit, like the whole thing on CrossFit, I have to get you so lean and so overstressed with CrossFit. Like the sport itself, that's going to be an adaptation from just doing the sport typically.
Could I add some context to the train surrounding your cycle? This is how I view it as a strength coach. I would love if you want to add on. I like talking about this context in the context of elite athletes, right? These women have done the basics. They have the bottom of the pyramid done. They have done an undulating periodized program for at least 12 months. They are eating at least at maintenance or in surplus calories. They are sleeping. They have checked all of these giant boxes before I, as a coach, even tap into a tool of potentially training around a menstrual cycle, because that is like a fine-tuning tool. But in reality, can 99% of females benefit from 4 sets of 8 back squats at a particular percentage? Absolutely, right? So when we're talking about an average female in the service, she probably just needs a classic undulating periodized strength and conditioning program, right? Building her aerobic capacity, eating enough calories, maintaining a proper menstrual cycle. Once that's checked, then we can move on and fine tune. And that's where, as a coach, you, Michael, can go, you know what, I can play with this, I can play with that. Instead of doing 4 sets of 8 back squats, we're gonna do 4 sets of 6 at this percentage. Instead of this many calories, we're gonna tune it up, do this many calories, this many grams of fat. So you're fine tuning that, but would you give that advice probably to mass produce females who don't have a lot of good habits? Maybe, maybe not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd rather you master the white belt fundamentals before you try and be a black belt.
Exactly. Yes.
But to the periodization thing, if you do your 1-rep back squat on day 21 of your cycle, and then I have you do 4 by 8 reps at 70% of your 1-rep max, but I have you do that on day 4 of your cycle, that 70% or whatever is more like 90% at this point, or it's a different percentage. So that whole percentage thing has to change and alter based on the time of month as well. So I want my women to not be underfed. I don't want them to be hypocaloric. I want them to be iso or hypercaloric. I want them to have all those basic things dialed in because I want to build up as much of a resilient, I call it a combat chassis, if you will, but I want them to be as healthy as humanly possible. So when it hits the fan and they have to be sleep deprived and hypocaloric, and then they go amenorrheic, they're healthier, so it doesn't destroy them as much.
Yeah. Checking time here. It is 12:01. It's time for lunch. Obviously, we have 3 amazing guests here. They're probably going to be around for lunch, so please catch them, ask them questions, and we can give them a round of applause.